your fire burn. Let your fire burn.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Porcupine Perspective. I've got a treat for you guys today. I know you're just now getting used to Evelyn, and she's, of course, here with me. Evelyn, how are you doing on this Mother's Day?
I'm doing good. It's a good day.
That's
As
good
always.
to hear. That means your kids
day.
have taken care of you. That's what we want to hear. And we are joined also today by a first-time guest, Sophia. Sophia, how are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad at all. So thank you both for joining me. I know there's probably some stuff you would much rather be doing than hanging out with a guy like me on Mother's Day. So we'll try to make this as quick as possible and as painless as possible. Now, you may be asking yourself, why do I have this guest lineup? Most of you have seen in the news here lately that Alyssa Milano is calling for a sex strike. If you haven't had a chance to look too deeply into this, and let's face it, I can understand that you hadn't, there's been two new anti-abortion laws, Alabama and Georgia. Is that correct, Evelyn?
I believe so, yes.
The one in Georgia has passed, but the one in Alabama is still out for vote.
Well, keep in mind, they've passed, but they are not being enforced. That's a big note you want to have made on this, is that, yes, they one is passed, one is tabled right now, but neither are being enforced in any way.
Well, yeah, typically when they pass a law, there's a little bit of a lull period when they figure out how they're going to enforce it, what the penalties are going to be. The one in Georgia is, if I'm incorrect, let me know. Basically, if a doctor can detect a heartbeat, then he is no longer allowed to perform an abortion. Whereas in Alabama, it's basically once the cells are in utero and attached to the uterus, then, which of course, yes, I know I'm repeating myself there, there can't be an abortion. Am I right on that?
That is correct. Now, the thing even with the deal in Georgia, with there being that 6-week window, for a lot of women, that's also before they even know they're pregnant. A lot of times it's between, and
cycles.
Sophia, correct me if I'm wrong. It's between, I mean, for you, I don't know how it was, but for me, it was between 5 to 7 weeks where I was like, oh, hey, there's really something happening here.
Well, and what a lot of people don't realize is when they are counting weeks on pregnancy, one of those weeks is a period.
That is true.
Weeks is
So
like,
what most people would assume would be 4 weeks, when you should know it's actually closer to that 5 or 6 already.
well, and there are some tests that we even pick up at 6 weeks too. Like, that's super crazy early.
Yeah, and of course the reaction, and I definitely am on their side. The reaction is that, just like Evelyn said, there's many chances that you don't even know that you're impregnated yet. For whatever reason, you may think you have a cycle that's a little slow. It's not like a grandfather clock where it beats, on midnight without fail. It goes back and forth, stress and stuff like that. And I don't even know why I'm talking about this. It seems like that would probably be more
you're
in
a
your
dad. I mean, you've been on the other side of that. So, I mean, you have something to add there.
Yeah, I've got the calendar that tells me when it's time to go out to the garage for a week. You are absolutely correct.
Well, and, you were coming from it with probably a series of misconceptions. They don't really explain how cycles work to teenage boys. So you're coming from it from the side of, I had to learn that this stuff isn't how it actually works.
No, for us, it's very much, if they're having their cycle, it's both good and bad. Bad, you need to run, but good because you're not pregnant. If you're not looking for a child, obviously. So there's the little celebration, and then you go out to the garage for a week and then come back in when everything is back to normal, so to speak. So looking at this, and again, I think that this is a step in the absolute wrong direction. I'm happier that it's not the federal government at least doing this, but still seeing some state agency asserting a power that I don't believe it has is a problem. But here's the crux of it, and what I don't understand, and I'm just going to kind of outline this, and I'm turning it over to you guys unless I've got questions. Alyssa Milano has come out. Now, she's one of the people that are at the forefront of the Me Too movement. Very vocal during the Kavanaugh hearings. She was one of those that if a woman is saying that she has been sexually assaulted, we just need to believe her. You've got to start from the position of belief as opposed to, I disbelieve this until evidence proves otherwise. She's also the one that when women began to accuse Joe Biden of the exact same thing, she said, no, he's my friend. He would never, ever do this, turning 180 degrees from her Me Too stance. Now we have this outspoken lady who is at the forefront of this, that is stating that until these laws get changed, that women should no longer have sex with men. So basically, the conservatives have already won. This is exactly what the conservatives want, is abstinence as opposed to birth control. But the other side, and this is where my big question is before I turn it over, is how damaging is this to the feminist movement? You've got decades and decades of empowering women. And, women are not sex objects. Women are not the sexual playthings of men. And women can enjoy sex. It's no longer a duty that you have to do. And then you have someone as outspoken as this, basically flip-flopping that entire ideology.
Sophia, I'm actually going to want to get your perspective on this a little bit more. For those of you who don't know, you may hear me refer to once in a while as her being my sister, and she is, or as far as the way we were raised or comparing things like that. So just for listeners, that's where we are there. Sophia is my sister. But in addition to that, we do have very differing ideas in certain areas. And while I have 2 daughters, she has 2 sons. So there's going to be some things in here that I'm going to be pulling in with that as well. But being that you are newer to the podcast, would you mind kind of sharing your overall position on the whole deal with feminism and the Me Too movement? And then we'll kind of go from there.
Oh yeah, that's pretty broad. So my general stance on the Me Too movement, how would I sum that up? So I think it's something that's necessary. I think it's something that's been a long time coming. I feel like it's a response to the existence of, I'm trying to think of like how to sum it up. Like, I agree with the movement. I feel like it's become a little too broad. I feel like it's become a bit of a bandwagon, as you've seen with Alyssa Milano kind of flip-flopping back and forth. What's good in this case, but obviously he wouldn't do it in this case,
Right. Well, we had a conversation when we were out driving one time, I remember, where I think you had a conversation with your husband about the Me Too movement. And correct me if I'm wrong, he had made kind of an offhand comment, and it kind of set you off a little bit. But when we were going through and kind of comparing our own ideas, you had mentioned at one point, or I had mentioned, I'm sorry, that I felt not only that it was too broad, but that it, I think, worked against the goal that people had for it originally, when it was included things with, while I was walking by and somebody brushed my ass and I've been violated, and were classifying themselves in the same group as women who had been violently assaulted in some ways. And that I found offensive, that accidental or misunderstood things were being grouped into the same category. And I thought that was detrimental.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And you're going to see that pretty much any political movement. I feel like you're going to have the people who are in it for the right reasons and who understand some of the more nuanced issues. And then you're going to have the people who kind of bandwagon, or the people who, their social identity is that victimhood. So they're going to pile on as much as they can. I'm this, I'm that, I have this struggle and that struggle. And that's what their identity is built around. So when movements like this come around, those are going to be those voices that are getting out there loud and, kind of to the forefront, kind of the same way that the angry feminist archetype has become kind of a thing, because that's what you notice, are the people who are screaming the loudest. And a lot of times those aren't representative of the majority of people in the movement.
I could see that. Do you have, because I get asked the question a lot, how I feel about the movement, being that I have 2 daughters. Do you think this is beneficial for them? Do you think, do you think this is going to help them moving forward and feeling more protected and secure and safe and going out? And I kind of like what you were saying. I think it's a mixed bag. I think we have not over detailed it, but I mean, there's such a huge disparity now between what consent means, where there's some cases where a woman can say, well, yeah, I was fine in the beginning, but then I changed my mind. And so I feel like I've been put into a horrible situation because towards the end, I didn't want it anymore. And no, I didn't say anything. And no, he didn't know, but I still feel violated, where it's so getting so convoluted almost. How do you feel about that, having sons?
I feel like the conversations that I'm going to be having are going to be more informed about that. So rather than just touching on, hey, make sure she's not drunk, make sure you're not drunk, make sure you use protection, kind of the standard stuff, talking to him about not putting himself in positions where someone could say something against him that he couldn't disprove. I think another thing, talking to consent, is understanding that if there is a massive size disparity or a power differential, if you're her boss, if you're her supervisor, if you have power over anything in this person's life and you guys decide to pursue something romantically, you need to take steps to rectify that. I actually work at a local technical college, and one of our deans decided to date an instructor, and that completely restructured what programs fell under that dean. She was no longer over that instructor's program. It went to another dean. And we still have programs structured that way because when they chose to pursue that relationship, we had to account for power differentials. So I think that's something that a lot of young men probably aren't talked to about. They kind of get the, don't dip your nib in company ink talk, but they don't speak to a feminine perspective of a power differential. I think when you have a large size disparity, I've been in positions where I haven't felt comfortable telling someone no because they are so much larger than me, not in a romantic capacity, but I've noticed I word things differently. I'm not as hard on my nose if I'm physically intimidated by it. So I can see where some women, maybe they have that perspective.
I've got a quick question. I wanted to make sure that the listener's clear here. Are you talking about, when you're looking at the power differentials, is it just when the male is in a position of power over the female, or does it also apply when the female, let's say, is the boss of a male?
No, it absolutely applies either way. In the situation I called back, the female was actually over the male instructor. She was his superior, and they accounted for that before they started dating by restructuring the program so that she was no longer his direct report.
When I was originally dating my wife, I was actually in a position over her, and there was, of course, within the company we worked for, and honestly, all the companies I've ever worked for, there was this caution of, I think the word you used, don't dip your nib in the company ink. But the reason that we had that was not necessarily for in regards to this movement, but due to the inherent favoritism that would be created, and the rest of the coworkers would automatically assume that anything positive was due to the fact that you're in the inkwell, and anything negative is because you're fighting with the inkwell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point, is the perceptions outside of that's going to affect you too.
Okay, so it goes a little bit deeper. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. A lot's changed. I've been with my wife for many years, and this is a landscape I would not want to be pursuing anyone in. Let's just put it that way.
Okay, you brought up an interesting point a little bit earlier, Sophia, regarding talking to your sons and making sure that they don't do anything where they can't disprove what really happened. But I mean, you're talking about an act that's among the most private you can experience. So, I mean, short of going through and having a written consent form every single time you go to do something, I mean, how do you make sure that everybody's okay and on the up and up?
Yeah, that's part of the struggle with this. Is it kind of falls into victim blamey territory. The same reason that you wouldn't want to look at a rape victim and say, well, what were you wearing? What were you drinking? What were you doing? Where were you? Unfortunately, since we're kind of moving away from innocent until proven guilty, we're moving more towards every victim needs to be believed immediately, which means that the onus of proving innocence is on the person being accused.
I got to cut in here for just a moment, though, Sophia, because I think that there's an equal amount of danger in immediately putting full belief into any victim without doing your due diligence, as there is with completely disbelieving them and pushing past them. You know, we both have a friend of our family who, and just to give everybody a quick little bit of background here, he was accused by somebody at work of rape and lost his job. Almost lost his family. It was a big thing, only to find out later that he had turned down a girl's advances. She got pissed off about it, went to corporate and said all these things. And he even had proof that on the day she said these things happened, he wasn't even there. And he still lost his job and was completely defamed. And she went around later, if you remember, bragging about how she had done this and that it was all bullshit. So, I mean, there's a huge amount of power that comes with the accusation. And so even if it's disproven, it's out there forever. And how many people are going to do the due diligence to, you know, check and fact check, basically, and say, oh, yeah, you know, this really happened. This is something that follows people forever.
You'll have to forgive me if I'm not wording this properly. I'm not saying that I believe that this is how we should be approaching it. I think anyone who has an accusation deserves to be listened to, but it should be held up against the same light of evidence that any other kind of accusation or criminal anything should be held up against. What I'm saying is from the perspective of raising boys, if this is the current political and socio climate that we're raising them into, I want them aware of that. I want them aware that they're going to be at an immediate disadvantage if someone accuses them of something, and that I want them prepared on the steps of how to fight that back, not immediately talking to the police, seeking legal counsel, not trusting that their word is going to be enough to save them.
Right. It's going to be, just from a male's perspective, I'm going to interject this. I can't imagine of a way that I could actually prove that consent was not withdrawn during the act, even if we went with Evelyn's suggestion of having like a pre-sex agreement. There's no way of knowing that consent was not withdrawn during the act and then the act was completed. And then the worst part of that is, if you're not wearing protection, then there's all the evidence in the world that they need to send you to jail.
Yeah, it's a very, I mean, I can't imagine dating right now on either side, male or female. It's so complicated on where the rules stand now.
No, I agree that it's a very scary thing, but if you look at the amount of sexual misconduct cases that are brought up, and then the amount that actually go to court, and then the amount that actually result in conviction, it's an extremely narrow funnel. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't innocent people that get caught in that, and even one innocent person being convicted of something they didn't do is too many. But I also feel like people's concerns about this have become somewhat overblown. You know, I have several friends who are in the dating pool right now. The vast majority of people are going to be very rational, and we understand social contracts and implied consent and things like that. So, you know, is it a problem if it happens even once? Yes. Do I think it's something that's happening left, right, and center? Absolutely not.
Right.
I don't think a lot of it's necessarily getting to the criminal level, but and I'm interested to hear the case later that Evelyn was talking about. I don't think this is a good place to air it out, but in this case, there was no criminal charges filed, I'm guessing, right?
No, as far as I'm aware, like, they had warned him, like, oh yeah, the police are going to show up, you know, be waiting for that. And like, he was having just discussed this with his wife and kids, and you can imagine it threw everyone for a loop, and we're all like, what? But then the police never showed up, and nothing ever happened. And I think people kept trying to get her to go, and she said, oh, no. She wasn't willing to put herself on the record, which I think was everyone's first kind of, well, hold on. And it didn't take long until it was, and because at that point she was untouchable at work, because if they had tried to fire her or do anything, she could have claimed it was retribution for her coming forward with this information. So yeah, I mean, it was the first time I had ever experienced anything like that from anyone that I knew. So it was like a huge, like, whoa, lesson in the power that comes with just the accusation. and the power that maintains even after the accuser's like, oh yeah, it was bullshit. You know, that's just, it was a scary thing. And that's what I think of happening, even though I know is it a common thing? No. Did it result in prosecution or any legalities? Thankfully, no. But again, we live in a world now where, as you said, you have a social identity that dictates a large portion of your life, not just within your friends, but even within work. I mean, how many employers now do a Google check on you and what comes up? You know what I mean?
Facebook stalk you. And I'll say one more thing and I'll let you guys go back. I do not want anyone that's listening to this or either of my co-hosts here to think that I'm going, woe is me because I'm a male. I think that we don't have the worst end of this. Obviously, suffering through a rape is much worse than anything that's ever going to be done to me. But I want to make sure, as we try to balance everything on this podcast, I want to make sure that, you know, we're talking about both sides. And then I'll be quiet. Done.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up. And because as someone on this side who has experienced things that I should not have in this life, and I don't care to go into that any further, I think that there needs to be a reasonable look at any accusations that are made. But I don't think it needs to be taken the way it's broadcast as being, as like you believe every victim, no matter what, until. It's one of those where you take the information and you research and you look into the hell of it and get everything that you can and then go from there. I'm saying you reserve judgment until on either side. But
Yeah. No, and I absolutely agree with that. I think that once again, those voices that are saying, you know, guilty until proven innocent are sometimes the louder voices. I can say at my college, you know, we've had several reports with Title IX. We've had several interpersonal issues. We've had several students accuse other students of misconduct and things like that. And I can tell you just in my experience, dealing with both the police and, you know, with our personal security, you know, they're very kind when they listen to the complaint. They're very sympathetic. They do try their best to make the person feel like, you know, we believe you. But when it gets down to it, they're looking for details. They're looking for actual evidence. And if they don't have the evidence, one person's word isn't enough to,
right.
you know, create that report that's going to turn into that legal case that, you know. And I think that's kind of the balance we need to strike. We need to strike that balance of not immediately disbelieving someone, but I think you can still be sympathetic and kind when someone comes to you with something like that, but also not throw critical thinking by the wayside.
And I think you wrapped that up in a really, really good way. I'm going to try to point us back just a little bit to the bills that are going through Alabama and Georgia right now. As Shawn was describing, the one in Alabama has passed, not being enforced. The one in Georgia, oh no, I'm sorry, I reversed those. Yes, the one in Georgia is putting it down to a fetal heartbeat within the room, has passed, although the one in Alabama has been tabled. Now, the interesting thing with this one, and again, I don't want this to turn into a large abortion debate. That's clearly something, along with Me Too, I think everybody can feel very strongly about. And if you want to share how you feel on that, that's cool. We can go down that road. But the article that I found said, under the proposed Alabama bill, now this is the one that has been tabled, doctors would not be able to perform the procedure once the fetus is in utero. The reason this caught such national attention is that the only exception to this that exists within that bill are cases that involve serious health risk to the unborn child's mother. Cases of rape and incest are not exempt from this bill as they are in other states.
And where did you read that article from?
I believe that is from the Washington Post. I'll throw into my personal views on abortion. As Shawn said many times on this podcast, there's a belief that no one should be able to tell you what you can do to your own body, which I think is the root of most people's opinions on abortion. For me personally, I don't know if I could ever go through with it because I've been pregnant, and it's just my personal, I don't know if I could. But then I've not been in this position where I had a fully unwanted pregnancy, you know? And it affects everything from life thereafter, to your health. I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong along the way, and things that you have to recuperate from afterwards, whether you put the baby up for adoption, whether you keep it or abort it, whatever goes along the way. It's a huge impact on your body. So I can see why it brings up so much fervor, I guess you could say. But anyway, regardless of whether or not I feel I could personally go through it, in the cases of rape, in the cases of incest, especially, I cannot imagine having to carry that with you and then wonder if you're going to be able to love them. What would that do to the kid once they found out later? You know what I mean? I just have a hard time with that. So it's crazy when I see that, like, yeah, that's not an exemption. You need to carry this kid anyway. That's a tougher one for me. What are your thoughts on this?
I know we're not going into a debate about core abortion beliefs. What I will put on the plate right now is that I am morally opposed to abortion, but ethically, I am pro-choice. I do support pro-choice, Planned Parenthood, other areas and places where you can receive abortion and other just any kind of gynecological care. So that's kind of my stance. My concerns with these bills are that they are removing agency from. I may not agree with a woman's choice. I may not respect a woman's choice.
You're damn sure going to defend her ability to have the choice.
The minute we start, exactly. Do I think that in the case of maybe an unplanned pregnancy where maybe she's willing to go through the pregnancy, but she's not interested necessarily in raising the child, that we shouldn't make abortion more accessible and more socially acceptable? You know, obviously that would be preferable to termination, but at the end of the day, it's their choice, right, whether I can respect it or whether I would choose to do it myself. But yeah, my core issue with it is it's removing agents. It's basically telling women, we know better than you. Women who are forced to go through with unwanted pregnancies, there's huge issues with PTSD surrounding the birth, and that's not something that goes away even if you choose to do adoption. The socioeconomic impact is immense. I was very fortunate that I got a job when I was 6 months pregnant, but I had friends who were pregnant around the same time that I was, and companies will not hire you if you are pregnant because they know you have that maternity leave coming, however short it is or however unpaid. And that was another thing too, is I was not at my year, obviously, when I had my son. So I got a couple weeks of disability, which was not something that was regulated. That was something that the company offered me, but I didn't qualify for FMLA. I didn't have, any kind of financial safety net. So had I not been financially secure with my husband, however long I was out with the child, right, I was unpaid basically. And even if I went back to work immediately, and I've seen women who've done that, childcare is a huge expense. Not everybody's fortunate enough to have family who can kind of help. And if you want your child to be taken care of properly, you're going to have to spring for somewhere pretty nice. And a lot of women don't have that.
There's a lot of daycares that charge more per month than people pay for their homes.
Absolutely. And those aren't even like the super crazy high end ones. Some of the quotes we got for my two boys who are 3 and 1 right now, we're looking at close to, $600 a week between the two of them. Yeah, it's a huge financial burden, a huge psychological burden, and I feel like it's not a burden that the government should be able to enforce on someone if there is another option that could help them.
Especially in these cases where it's an unwanted, not
unwanted for
correct,
whatever reason, or someone who's extremely young, you're 13 or 14. Coercion is a huge one. I don't agree that a 13-year-old is of mature enough mind to make rational decisions. So even if a 13-year-old decides, I'm going to have a baby with my boyfriend.
Well, their brains aren't developed enough to understand the full repercussions and levity of the decision that they're making. They're going to be responsible for that baby for a longer amount of time than they have currently been alive. So, I mean,
do I think we should enforce abortions for 13-year-olds? No, but we also need to put that on the plate. So once the full weight of their decision comes into play and they start realizing, I believe that they they should have that option.
If I can interject, I have a question I'd like to ask both of you ladies. And I think this kind of dovetails nicely with this conversation. Do you think that the federal government should then maybe provide birth control, or at least subsidize birth control, so that the amount of unwanted pregnancies could possibly go down?
Sophia, I'll let you take that one first.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that my personal view is taxation is kind of unavoidable at this point. And I'm kind of resigned to the fact that a good chunk of what I earn is going to get pushed into a shared pot and kind of distributed how it may. If I had the choice to support something like that or choose kind of where my money went, I think that would be an excellent option. I think not just increased education, but also, you can educate someone about birth control, but if they don't have access to a pharmacy, or if they're not in a position in their life where, they can reasonably be expected to take a pill every single day like clockwork and do those refills and make the commitment, I think that making it easier to access in any way and cheaper to access in any way is a good thing.
Let me up the ante before Evelyn gets in here. Since she made you go first, I'm going to give her the harder side of this. Do you think that the government should subsidize this, even if it is against the parents' wishes?
Oh, you suck.
Let's say it's for religious reasons or whatever else. It doesn't really matter.
Well, you just keep making it murkier as you go. Thanks for that. I don't know if there's a right way to answer that question. I really don't, just because now you're crossing religious lines in one way. But two, you're having to look at which is the lesser of two evils, allowing them methods for protecting themselves and educating themselves, which, like it or not, I know families who are quite religious and they exempt their kids from human growth and development lessons that go into what the body goes through and what risks come with sex, so that once they're introduced to it, they're at a higher risk for not only contracting SIDs, but also getting pregnant and things that go along those lines. So do I personally take issue with the government making, if we're already, as Sophia said, we're already paying in, if I had a choice and making some things available? I don't think it would be wrong to give people access, and younger people access, to furthering their education on these things, to providing them means of protecting themselves, especially once they are of age and capable of making the choice for themselves either way.
Would you, in the absence of having parental approval, and let's speak to your two girls here, if they so chose to receive this birth control, would you at least want them to have some form of an education about it before they actually get it, so that there's no misconceptions? Should they complete a sex ed course like we have to complete a driver's ed course? And I'm not being flippant, but it's more, I'm trying to see what mechanism you would employ.
I have no issue with them being educated on sex and the risks and how-tos therein at all. I have a friend of mine who contracted herpes later in life from her husband, not realizing that cold sores and oral sex was a way of transmitting the disease because he didn't have the genital type, but it still resulted in her contracting it because it's transmittable that way. Grown woman, didn't know. So am I okay with my girls having that knowledge moving forward and having the opportunity to protect themselves therein? Absolutely. I have no issue with that. And let's be honest, how many of us are really comfortable going up to our moms and dads and saying, hey, explain how all this works to me. How does this happen? How does this happen? What does this happen here? There's times they're going to gain more and feel more comfortable asking the questions for areas that they don't understand to someone outside of the family.
If you remember our last episode, one of the questions I was asking, and I don't know if Sophia's had a chance to listen to it, so bear with me one moment. I had asked you what order you would want certain things taught to your children: sex, religion, politics. We were trying to decide what age. I guess my question here, and I'm not meaning to turn up the flame, but I'm very interested to see where you would go with it. Let's say this is a parent that has a religious objection to their child learning this, but the child wants to know. Which one do you weigh heavier personally? And again, this is not saying this is what the government should do, but let's say your two little girls want to learn about something that you do not want them to learn about. Should you get the ability to make that decision, or should government or state education get that ability?
To be honest, I think part of it depends on their age. I have a 7-year-old right now, and quite frankly, I don't, outside of what is inappropriate touch and things she needs to be aware of, I don't need her having a full knowledge of what oral sex is, or or anything therein regarding to that. That just makes me uncomfortable on a level I don't even want to discuss. However, I have a daughter who's about to be 13. She has started her period. She is developing in all those ways. So if there are things that she wants to know as hormones are starting to rage and as urges are starting to come up, I would rather have her going forward with a healthy knowledge of what risks also come with that. So, Sophia, what do you think?
Not to redirect, I'm going to explain kind of my basis of why I'm kind of shooting off in this direction. We concentrate a lot on what rights the government should have and how the government should think and feel and enact on certain things. I'm someone who chose to pursue sociology in my education. And so when I hold things up against what do I think about this, what is my opinion on that, I think of it more in a social context, because I believe that our society should inform our government and should kind of steer the way that the government goes and things like that. So socially, when we're more restrictive, the government will reflect that. When we're more permissive, the government should also reflect, because the government at its core should be its people. So that's socially. So do I believe that the government should have the final say on when and how people learn things? No. I believe socially, though, what I would like to see is, rather than 18 being that cutoff point of, okay, you're an adult, we have no control over you now, I would like to see young people be given agency kind of in a graduated sense. So 13, 14, you're not old enough to make the decision to drink yet, maybe, but maybe you should have agency on if your parents can opt you out of certain things at school. 15, 16, maybe you should be allowed to have a beer, or maybe you should be allowed, you know what I'm saying? Kind of, instead of 18 being that cutoff point of, okay, you can have everything now except drinking, and then 21 being, okay, now you can have everything except renting a hotel room.
Well, hey, you can gamble too at 21. I'm just throwing that in.
Oh, yeah, gambling and drinking. So I would like to see a socially change by providing kind of stepping stone agency rather than that one big cutoff, because I've seen a lot of people who, they're so used to being held so tight that when those reins are cut at 18, they have no idea what to do with themselves. And I think it does human beings a disservice. We learn by experience, and you don't learn by swimming by dipping someone in the deep end of the pool. It's not an all or nothing kind of thing. So I think that as we are learning more about the human brain and human development and what's best for people, I would like to see personally the government kind of reflect what's better socially by allowing more agency at different ages.
I was going to say, I absolutely agree with you on the agency thing. I am 100% right behind you. 18 is not a magical age. There's nothing fundamental that changes from 17 years, 364 days to 18 years. And I think children should absolutely have more agency and more control. And it's not even really a negative. It's more from a pragmatic side. You and I both know that if your child wanted to do something that you did not, and they continue to do it, then unfortunately there'd be some form of repercussions, or you might withhold, okay, you can't do soccer because you're not doing this. So it'll be very difficult to give them 100% agency if the parents are against it. But the one, and since you're coming from more of a sociology background, I'm interested to hear your kind of take on this. Should government reflect society? I agree with you, but in a democracy, even in what we see here, a constitutional republic on a national level, what about the minorities? Because the government's getting elected by the majority. The minority does not have a voice within government. Do you fear that maybe they will never ever have government or society reflect their personal views?
I think if we keep government stratified the way that it was originally intended to be, with smaller local governments that understand their smaller local constituents, and then with the larger government just kind of being that big rubber stamp of making sure that on the whole things are as fair and equitable as they can be, which it's real life. Nothing's ever going to be completely fair to everybody. I feel like probably not going to be a super popular opinion on here, but I do believe in government. I do believe that it is necessary in certain ways. It's kind of the nature of the beast of being civilized and enjoying society the way that we do now. I think if I'm a minority, if I have a certain belief that is held very, very close to my heart and it's important enough that I'm willing to kind of stake my identity around it, which some issues are that important, I feel like there would be a region, or I could start a region or whatever that would reflect that. So if I'm more liberal, if I'm more whatever, you know, there's certain parts of the country where maybe that government's going to reflect. So certain things in California, maybe I'd be more comfortable with. If I'm extremely conservative, if I believe very strongly about certain things, maybe I want to stay right smack dab in the middle of the Bible Belt. And if we have local and state governments that are imbued with the level of power that they should have, it makes it more likely that even though I may be a minority over here, I can find an area where my more closely held beliefs are reflected in the government that's over me.
Okay, and this is my last question, and I'll let you guys get back to it. Here's my one concern, and I agree with you. There are a lot of people that want different things, and there's no way where a heavily centralized government is going to be able to take care of everyone's wishes. It's just impossible. We've spoken about that many times, and I've got a lot of libertarian friends that feel that government definitely plays a role in everyday life. Evelyn is actually
Evelyn's one of them.
Evelyn's actually one of them, and I haven't hit her yet, but she would probably knock me out anyway. But here's my question.
You make me sound like just like big burly woman beast. Like
I know your voice does. It's not me. I'm just kidding. That wasn't
you're
right.
such a dick.
Happy Mother's Day. But
Oh my god.
the last thing I was going to ask you.
That stuff's great. Don't let it make you feel bad.
Yeah, exactly. You had talked about one of the things that you liked, or at least what you'd like to get back to, is a more heavily stratified government the way it was intended. Isn't that what we're already seeing in Alabama and Georgia, where they are kind of voicing their own personal opinion? What keeps a local government or a state government from just trampling over the rights of its individual people?
That kind of calls back to, in the middle of all my babbling, the larger overarching government kind of keeping things fair and equitable. To me, ideally, the largest form of government, like the most supreme form of government, their primary concern should be making sure that even in areas where maybe it's kind of a minority belief or something that maybe isn't as mainstream popular, that it still adheres to certain moral standards and that it doesn't kind of step on those inalienable rights that our forefathers loved so much. So to me, the choice of what to do with my body, ideally, I would like to see that enforced on a national level. I feel like if they were able to oversee and say, hey, we're cool with you guys making pot legal, whatever, like do what you gotta do, smoke what you gotta smoke, but maybe don't tell someone what they can do with it.
Well, doesn't that kind of go against what you were saying, though, is in that if people want to live somewhere that's conservative and has those laws, they can do so, or if they want to live somewhere more liberal, they can. I mean, doesn't that counter what you just said?
Absolutely.
This is why I love my sister. She'd be like, yeah, I fucked up. You didn't fuck up. But no, it's
no,
that's where it's
it absolutely does. And that's a huge part of one thing that you kind of learn looking at sociology and human psychology is it's very natural for us to want two things that are at odds with each other. I can definitely want a government that would make the world exactly the way that I want it to be. But whether that's actionable in the real world is absolutely up for debate, and in some cases is demonstrably impossible.
So what Alyssa Milano tweeted out in response to this legislation going through Georgia and Alabama was, "We can love sex and fight for our bodily autonomy. There are lots of alternatives to cis men. Protect your vaginas, ladies. Men in positions of power are trying to legislate them." So she essentially, and it's like a big pink X on it, and says sex strike.
I think it even had it was a hashtag. This is a trending thing on Twitter, if I remember correctly.
So anyway, it's causing a lot of hullabaloo both ways, with people all behind it and others saying, and I got to read a couple of the responses here because I thought they're actually pretty great. One of the responses against her tweet said, "Please stop feeding the narrative that women are providers and men are consumers of sex. Bribing men for equal rights with access to our bodies is not how feminism works." And the other one that I had liked was, "This makes it seem like sex is something women do as a favor to men. It also furthers the misogynist theory that women should be shamed for liking sex at all." But then again, on the other side, there are supporters, some of whom said if they want to control our bodies' reproductive organs, then we should just deny sex to cis men. Now, for those who are unaware, cis men are those who are genetically born and identify as male. Yeah, it's created an interesting fervor, as well as the kind of obvious point of, well, isn't that just abstinence? Which is what conservatives have been pushing for anyway. So anyway, what are your thoughts on this whole deal?
I'm not crazy about it for the same reason, kind of the first two tweets that you read. It's the same reason that I'm not crazy about the abortion laws that are coming out right now. It removes agency from women. Anytime you have an embargo, it's a traded good. So looking at sex as a traded good.
Well, it is the oldest profession, Sophia. Keep that in mind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it absolutely, it looks at it in that light as a good or a service that women provide and that they can withhold.
Like, we don't enjoy it.
Or political.
It's just a chore. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the kind of guiding principles I have is, does this remove agency from women? It's the same reason that, we've talked about this before, sentencing laws. A woman statistically will get a lighter sentence than a man, even though they may have the same exact crime, similar lack of criminal history,
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
It's disempowering to look at a woman and say she can be less of a victimizer. She can be less of a predator, tying this back before I get off on my sentencing laws tangent, because that's going to be a whole other episode.
Oh yeah, we've had long talks about that one.
Yes. So I don't agree that this is the way to enact the change that myself and I'm sure many other women would like to see. I don't agree with the abortion laws. I would love to see them repealed, or like the one that was, basically taken off the table. I would love it to stay there. I would just love to see, maybe encouraging more activity in politics, maybe encouraging more education, encouraging, maybe get out and vote, maybe do things, don't just
deny sex.
Don't look at it as,
I said, don't just deny sex.
Yeah, I think part of the problem with this too is it sets men and women at different sides of the table. Men and women should be working together to enact laws that affect everybody. It shouldn't be
he versus she.
Men are doing this and men are doing that. When you see an abortion bill being signed and you only see men at the table, women are, like 55% of the population or something right now. I'd have to look up the statistics, but it doesn't rationally make sense that so many of our lawmakers are male, and with an abortion bill, there's maybe like one token woman in the background,
Well, how many, and just to be devil's advocate, do you have a direct representation of women that are running? Are 55% of the positions or 55% of the candidates actually women, representative of the community? I would argue no, just like we don't have the same thing. And I'm not naysaying. In my opinion, I would say none of these assholes should be making these laws. If there's no victim, there's no crime. But the one thing that didn't get mentioned in the tweets, and this is just going to be kind of a fun one to wrap this up, she said specifically, we should deny sex to cis men. Does that mean that if you are a non-cis man, you're not a man?
Well, no, but if you're a non-cis man, then you are not capable of getting someone pregnant, therefore affecting these abortion laws.
But that's still...
Right.
I just
get
thought
what
that
you're
was
saying.
that was a funny counterpoint to it. It's like, okay, if the social identity and the social construct is so much of what we are, then why would you deny them, or why would you not deny them as well? Now, and you may be right, they can't get you pregnant, but it says nowhere in there that we should deny sex unless the cis man has been sterilized. True?
That's true.
Okay. I just want to throw that out there.
But no, it's like I said, it's all going kind of a little squirrely sometimes, I think. And it's, again, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you in on this one, just because while we are so similar in many of our views, you bring a perspective of things, especially with your sociology degree and the way that you look at things that I don't always see them, which brings me enlightenment in ways that I don't always have speaking to other people. So I really wanted to share what you had to bring as well with the listeners, and just prove that, I mean, even if you don't agree, or sometimes even you can even be at odds with one another, at least opening your ears to listen can sometimes broaden your understanding and even change your ideas from time to time.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I enjoy conversations with people who, see things differently. And some of my favorite conversations I've walked away from thinking like, well, I've never thought about it that way.
And then you're texting me going, this asshole was saying these things. I'm going to talk to you about it later because, girl, oh my God.
No. And obviously there's some people where I leave and I'm like, okay, like I don't agree with you and I don't see why you believe that, but have a nice life. But yeah, tying back to the original
She's never that nice.
tweet and
She's
everything.
coming off so nice. She's never that nice walking away from somebody. You are walking away going, you are a fucking idiot. Oh my God.
No. Yeah, in my maybe privately, but I'll be like, yeah, that's great. Have a nice life. Like I had a boss one time get into an evolution smackdown with me one time. And I left and we were perfectly polite and she gave me a great recommendation for my next job and I've never talked to her since. So I believe that it's possible to disagree with someone in every single way that it's possible to disagree with them, morally, ethically, logically, and still be respectful.
No, now that I agree with. I just meant you walked, like you were saying, you were walking away thinking, oh, well, that wasn't that great, but oh, well. I'm saying, no. Your inner dialogue, I know you. Like, no way. But yes, I agree that you are capable.
Yeah, it wasn't that
right. I believe we are all fully capable of having a respectful conversation, even if we're at odds.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that I think Twitter, the reason that so much stuff that comes out that is incendiary and causes these dialogues is because with Twitter, there's not that filter, there's not that face. People can just kind of send their thoughts out into the universe for the most part unchallenged. I mean, you can ignore replies, you can choose not to see the people who are tweeting back at you. You can kind of scream into the void whatever you want to say. And some people are able to use that responsibly, and some people, such as in this case, it kind of displays the way that some of their beliefs and some of the things they want to say and do are at odds with things that they've said previously or that they still say that they currently believe.
Agreed.
I personally would like to see a platform of maybe having more women run for government, instead of a sex embargo. I would like to see, get involved in politics. Like there shouldn't be all men at this table. We need to have equal representation. And it's not on equal representation. It's on how can we strong arm the people in power into doing what we want them to do, as opposed to how do we become people.
But isn't that exactly what government does to the individual? Strong arm you into doing what they want?
Yeah, and I think that's what we need to fight against.
And I agree. I had to drop that.
No, and that's absolutely right. I think that we're so busy looking at how can I push this lever, as opposed to, well, let me think of a better way to word that. We're so busy trying to pull the puppet strings that we don't just remove the middleman. I don't need to worry about writing my congressman if I'm out there enacting change myself. Or if I believe in the political process, I need to get involved rather than, sending my thoughts out into the ether.
Absolutely. Or if you don't have a congressman to write to because there's no government authority. But I know we disagree on that. And yeah, and that's fine. I like talking to people that disagree with me because there's no way to challenge your beliefs talking to people that agree with you. And one of my goals is to talk to as many people that, a lot of times I'll think they're insane. I'm still withholding judgment on you. I'm just kidding. But I really appreciate you ladies spending part of Mother's Day with me. I want you to get back to your families. I appreciate all the commentary that you both brought. It's definitely going to be something I think will be useful to our listeners. So at that point, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Listener, I greatly appreciate you spending your afternoon or some time with us, and we will see you next time.
Always looking back over your shoulder. Waiting around to make you move. Don't hold back, come on and get down to it. Live your life the way that you want to.